Hello, everyone. I want to thank you guys for coming and watching my presentation today. I don't know if you guys just sat through Zach's, but he did a pretty nice job. And what I'm going to try to take an approach on is kind of addressing some of those concerns that can hopefully block guys like him from coming into your networks and taking over your computers. So the topic today is simple security defense to thwart an army of cyber ninja warriors. So we're really going to look at the foundational principles of building a security program and kind of dig into some of the areas. There's going to be a lot of details in the slide decks, and hopefully you'll be able to come back and just rewatch the movies, take down a lot of the notes. But we're going to go pretty in depth on what it takes to build up your security foundation in your company so that you can withstand any attacks. So a little bit about me. I'm an information security engineer. I have my hands in a lot with security. I specialize in application security. That's probably my favorite area, but I know a lot about database security, penetration testing, programming. I just finished my master's degree in information security, which is a big relief for me. It takes up a lot of evenings, so now I'm excited to really focus on the research that I want to in the security community. So also one of the DerbyCon CTF creators. I don't know if any of you guys are participating in it, but if you are, or if you haven't, hopefully next year it'll be around again, and it's a lot of fun, so I encourage you guys to take part in that. And if you guys want to follow me on Twitter, and that's my wife in the picture. I'm married, and I have 3 cats. I don't know if that makes you guys like me more or less, but we'll see. So the first thing that comes to mind is, how can security be simple? So one of the things is hackers are using the same tactics over and over to get into your corporations. I mean, every day on the news you're hearing about more databases being compromised, database dumps going to Payspin, and I mean, you're constantly searching out there for your own accounts and usernames and changing passwords, and there's a lot to keep up with, and that's because so many automated tools allow people just to point and click and run buttons and just completely compromise the same data and attack vectors over and over again. And it also allows hacking methodologies to be successful, and you can just start learning and researching some of those. And I know last year was heavily talked about was the PTES, the Pen Test Execution Standard, which if you are not familiar with it, it's a great resource to go and really start arming yourselves with the arsenal that the attackers and effective pen testers and corporations are using to be effective. So your security program is much like a puzzle. So you have all these pieces that you have to fit together. You don't always know what goes where, which thing to do, but what's easy to look at is when the puzzle is complete, it's very strong. If you hold up a puzzle and all the pieces are together, it's hard to pull apart. But even if you're missing 1 or 2 pieces, it's huge eyesores in the final product. And so that's kind of what we want to take a look at and make sure that we can get all these pieces tied together properly so that you can defend yourselves. So you don't need bottomless pockets for security, and I know it's heard over and over that it is expensive to build a program to get the right products, tools in. So we're going to focus on the aspects of it that you can really build on principles and foundations so that it doesn't have to be a major cost center for your company. You can utilize and leverage free tools and processes, and then once you get those implemented successfully and properly, you can start leveraging a lot of the big name tools out there that are going to just leverage and allow you to skyrocket your security posture. So again, it's not expensive, but security it requires passionate people, and I can't encourage that more. Is just if you're looking for hiring people, find people that are passionate about what they do, because that's really how you're going to get people that are going to really improve and innovate in your security program. It also requires planning. So there's so many pieces to the puzzle to put together. A lot of it may seem overwhelming, but it's really not that hard when you break it down into the little pieces. And you cannot buy true security. It's all about the people you have, the processes in place, and the tools that you leverage to really protect your organization. So we're going to start building a program, and hopefully at the end of this talk you'll have learned a few different things so that your program can kind of look at that like that castle that can withstand and hold up over the years. So one of the things that may come to mind is, hey, I have a 0 day. What now? How's my security posture going to hold up? But I don't like the term you're 1 0 day away from compromise, because if I'm a CSO or CISO in my company, I'm talking to my CEO, you don't want to have to tell your CEO, we're just 1 0 day or one push of the button away from breach. I mean, that's a terrible way to go day to day on your job security. I mean, at that point, you never know from day to day. So we want to take a security and layers approach where you're building layers, and I know the donkey and Shrek really because ogres have layers, so Shrek really understood this, and so we're gonna portray this to you guys as well. So we're gonna start with an exploit. So what's a common attack vector that seems to always be vulnerable no matter where you go? Your kneecap as well, but what's part of your kneecap? Is it the people? So we're gonna focus on the people of your organization. We're gonna call it curiosity. And is anybody familiar with the recent Java vulnerabilities or heard of Internet Explorer vulnerabilities out lately that may compromise browsers? And so there's been a few 0 days out lately in the past couple weeks that have, since I think they're either patched or working on patches. But it makes sense to utilize the social engineering attack vector to utilize these 0-day attacks to see if you can get people to click links or browse to certain web pages to exploit them. So I kind of walked through a demo before this, and we're not going to go through the demo, but we're going to pretend like a demo is happening. So we're using a tool called Set. I don't know if you guys have heard of Relic or Dave Kennedy, but we're going to use his tool. So let's pretend we go in the set. I think it's 1, type 2, type no, type 21, or whatever port you want. And eventually we come up with a Metasploit module to use the latest Java attack. So we pull up and build a website, we get a URL, and we want to package this into either a PDF or a hidden meta refresh on a cross-site scripting vulnerability or whatever approach we want. We send it out to our user or tell them to check out this cool new link or click this to get a bonus, whatever you want to do. So the user unknowingly goes, browses, clicks on the link, browses the page, redirects them back to Gmail or whatever you want to clone, and in Metasploit you can see you immediately get an interpreter session. It goes unknown to the user, and at the bottom we've just taken over a Windows 7 computer running IE9. So we want to take a look at this attack because was it successful? Maybe. Maybe we have limited privileges. So we want to dig down and see what layers do we have to breach to have a maximum impact attack, and what do we have to protect against to avoid this. So the first thing that comes to mind is user account privileges. As soon as we get that shell, if you go ahead and try get system or something like that, you're not always going to be successful with other vulnerabilities to escalate privileges. So one thing to always think about with your users and kind of think about your own company is what's the majority of your users running as? Are they all local admins on the computer they're using, or do you have them just as least privilege where they can't execute or install applications? Because that goes a really long way in protecting your users. Also, firewall rules allowing the shell outbound. Now, if they go and get this exploit and click it, how is the reverse shell going to get back to the attacker? Is it going directly out the firewall and maybe port 21 on FTP, or what do you guys allow directly out? Or do you filter the users through proxy servers, or just completely deny egress filters out to maybe just certain locations? So just things to keep in your back of your mind. Also, antivirus detection. We all know it's not perfect against things. A smart attacker is going to go and they're going to write something that's not going to have an antivirus signature, but it's pretty effective against protecting your users in attacks that are already out there, and it's an added benefit just to help. And also user awareness. What can we do to get your users to not click these links? So there's a lot of different defenses to implement, and we're going to kind of go through these, dig in, and learn a little about them. But here's a listing of them. I'm not going to go through them because we're going to dig into them. The first one is user awareness. People are always going to be an inherent risk to your organization. It's probably most likely the biggest vulnerability you're going to come across. The cool thing is, people also have the potential to be your most valuable asset in your company. I mean, security guys can only go so far. You can only hire so many in your security team. But if you can promote security in your organization and really you're expanding the size of your security team to your whole corporate associate population. And that's really the ultimate goal, is just to have a whole army of security personnel to defend and be aware. One way to do that is to make security the trend. You want to make it cool, because we all know that security is cool, but not everyone always understands that or thinks it is. The business doesn't always. So we want to ingrain security everywhere. We want to teach them to have the security mindset. So every time that they come across or read an email from maybe corporate communications or anything, we want to integrate that security article in there, just maybe a paragraph, but just something so that they always have the mindset where your users are getting bombarded with security knowledge and learning opportunities for themselves. And you can do that through a highly effective way as an awareness week, maybe that just to dedicate. It doesn't have to be anything huge, but have a couple of security people that either know about security or something come and just talk and give examples and just teach your users, because we find that they're always willing to learn if you're willing to offer your time and patience with them. Also, just newsletters, posters, bulletins, and even screensavers as reminders. So we're going to play a quick game. And I know what you guys are thinking. I hope that's not the replacement officials. So the good news is I picked up a real official NFL ref for this one, so we'll be good. So what do you guys see? Hot dog. That's right, lunch. So we want to always teach the hacker mindset for your associates. And a lot is just being aware and understanding what hackers think, how hackers think. I mean, when I saw that hot dog, I'm thinking, man, if this guy has attack dogs or something, I'm set. I just take a 6-pack of hot dogs and roll in, and you feed the hot dogs, and you're good. And you just breach the perimeter of their physical security. So, I mean, I know that's a pretty example that maybe not happens every day, but it's just having that mindset of when they see a screen unlocked or something, knowing that, wow, they think, man, an attacker could really do some damage or steal some files, rather than looking at the screensaver or background, I guess, and thinking, that's a pretty picture, you know? So another thing is, users can't always protect themselves. You can't expect every user to have the knowledge and awareness 24/7. I mean, it's just not always ingrained in their minds. And so we want to do our best to protect the users as well. So one thing is just to make sure that their standard user accounts are least privileged. And whenever you do have administrators, system administrators, which I used to be one, and I understand they may have some issues with taking away admin privileges from their regular accounts. It's kind of a pain in the hold down shift and right click and say run as administrator or run as different user and things, but it's getting them into the mindset of understanding that they are vulnerable. They have a lot of power in your organization, and it's so effective to migrate their administrative level accounts away from them, so that if they do fall prey to attacks, which attackers will just look through LinkedIn and try everything they can to find the people that are going to have the administrative privileges in your companies, because it makes sense. So if they have created or separate administrative accounts, you can give them terminal servers, install their tools, just provide those solutions so that you don't become a hindrance. Also, endpoint system protection. We want to protect the PCs as well. We already talked a little bit about installing antivirus, but applying security patches is absolutely vital. Very rarely do I see patches break systems. I understand some of the legacy systems and things they don't always want you to touch, but you have to really get people in the mindset that the patches and updates are out there for your users' own good, and that it can really help them. And also, I'm a huge advocate for getting all of your systems on the domain, because whenever you have separate work groups throughout and scattered around, there's no way you can keep an inventory and really understand your security posture in your organization. So it's absolutely vital to have centralized control. And also, full disk encryption is a good thing to install, so when a laptop is lost or something, then all your data is not gone. So centralized management is really key to getting started to be able to have a good security program. And centralized management isn't even necessarily a security function. I mean, as a good, solid IT shop, you should have that be using Active Directory or a configuration database to really maintain and understand all of your systems. And so if you I also really like group policy, because you can implement so many things out of group policy and it's a lot less work both from your system administrators, because they don't have to go through and check. They just make sure a machine is on the domain in the proper OU, and they're getting all these policies that security people can set. You can map. I also like mapping users to their a provisioned file share, because if you give them a corporate-owned file share, your security team can watch and maintain all the permissions and user accounts and roles on it. And it also keeps them from saving all of your confidential and proprietary information from your company on their laptop. So if it does get lost or stolen or compromised, there's a lot less information on there to be taken. Network protection is also key and very important. restricting direct outbound connections are very important and really will minimize a lot of attack vectors. I mean, there's malware that can be proxy aware and go through proxy servers and things, but if you're restricting, recently we blocked port 21, and not just for packet inspection, but actually for everyone across the board in the organization. And I mean, it may have caused about a week of headaches getting those whitelists in place, but just being able to block from our standpoint, it's an insecure protocol. It was a huge win, and it kind of gets that awareness mindset too. Whenever they're starting to use FTP, the transfer maybe files outside of your organization, it gives us a way to know where the data is going, but also they think about it and understand then a little better about FTP, and there's better ways like SSH and things that can't be traced and tracked through any packet sniffing or wireless. So here's my favorite area is application security. And I think this is absolutely vital to have a focus in your organization. And I'm probably biased because that's what I do from day to day, but I do think it's absolutely important. And their applications are essential to every aspect of your business. They're really, I view them as the doorways and portals to your intellectual property. They go to your databases, and it's really what your users interface with every single day. So how well do you know your applications? Can you easily pull a list and say, all of these applications are being used in our organization? Or do you have what I've seen as application sprawl, where people in business units just go and they continually install more applications and download, and they're at SourceForge downloading all these cool tools that help them do their jobs? And it's just, it's important to have a centralized management of your applications in your organization, because it, both from a lawsuit perspective on licensing and things, but also a lot of malicious and backdoors in them. So that's something to always consider, and I recommend creating an inventory of those applications. That way your application security program can really have a handhold around those. And the approach that we take is reviewing all applications. We review absolutely everything. I mean, it doesn't mean that we're going to spend 2 weeks on a simple application that's going to be internal only that does a very small function, but we want to look and just be able to identify every application. And what we do is we perform application security reviews on them, and we'll do different things depending on the use and business justification of the application, but we'll do source code reviews, both manual and automated. Dynamic manual and automated tools where you just point a scanner at the website or whatever it is if it's a web app, and also what I call due diligence reviews. And these are a lot of the ones where they might be third-party applications where you download and you don't necessarily have the code for them or know a lot about those. So we'll dig into those in a couple minutes here. So a key part of this is training your developers in the secure software development lifecycle. And if you're a software company or developing software, you know you're not going to have a lot of application security guys to go around your whole organization. It's absolutely impossible. So the best way to leverage the ability to save them time and make them more effective is to start focusing on the root cause of issues, which is your developers if they're developing the vulnerable applications. So you want to be integrated as much as you can from the conception of the development idea. And so that way, before they spend hundreds or thousands or millions of dollars on it, you can already say, this is a bad idea. It's never going to be approved. It's going to be a security vulnerability against our brand reputation and could have negative consequences. So you want to continue your oversight throughout the development cycles. And you also, one of the approaches we have is we perform a security assessment before any applications are released to production. And we go through it very thoroughly. If it's going to be something delivered, we go through and we check on all the source code lines and pretty much do a full review of it, and we'll go through some of those steps as well. So you say, but I don't know code. I'm a security guy for my company. I may be the only one, but I don't know code. I don't understand it. Or maybe you're a Python ninja and all your developers write in .NET or Java. And obviously, if you can do a lot of Python and scripting, you can catch on pretty fast. But you don't have to be the best programmer, but the more you know, the better you are at pen testing, the better you understand common basic security principles, and the better that you know compliance, the more effective you'll be in assessing your applications within your organization. But you have to start somewhere. So where I like to start is a checklist where I like to provide to developers. So that way, whenever they come to me and you get someone that is interested in security or doesn't want to have to delay their project because of a lot of bad code that they've developed, I want to be able to provide them with just the correct set of resources that I'm going to be looking for and expect from them, and so that they can do their due diligence as well and start learning because they don't have time to go through and learn about OSSTM and OWASP and ASVS and BSIM and PCI and FIPS and NIST and common criteria, and there's just so many standards and baselines. And it gets to the point where we already talked about building a security program, but where does a developer start to learn and know what we're going to be looking for and what can really impact the security posture of their applications? So I have a few different categories that I like to talk with them about. And so it starts off with providing them with application risks. I want to getting them to understand that the best protections that they can do for their application is to protect against every input and output control within their applications, because that's really where the attackers can have an impact on, or the inputs and outputs. And you want to minimize the surface area for attack. So we're going to look at this review checklist, and the cool thing is, I always, instead of calling it a checklist, I tell them it's a cheat sheet. This is how you're going to pass a security route, because it's tricking them, because if they do all these things, I'm not going to probably have any findings, or if they are, they're going to be very few and easy to fix. So it's a win-win for both sides. So here's the different categories for passing the security review. We're going to go through and look at some examples and take these in depth a little more. The first thing is passwords. Are you password protecting your application? And I've seen so many applications where it takes maybe 1 character or 0 characters to even set the login to an application. And if you take an application that you're building from ground up, the best way is to implement either optional policy or a way that the customer or consumer can turn these on and off and modify, or just require like 9 characters, a complex password, lockout functionality to protect from brute forcing, which will defend against a lot of attackers and hackers, because I know for me, whenever I go against the system, I love to just throw brute forcing against password dictionaries, and you usually pretty much have close to 100% success if your password policy controls aren't in place. Password expiration as well. And also accounts and rules. A lot of the main frameworks that your developers are going to be writing in, whether it's .NET, they're going to have built-in controls for accounts and roles and responsibilities. So use those. Make use of the things that have been checked in and out and already approved and used by corporations. Don't try to create your own custom roles and settings for those. I like this one, how if you see the passwords, and it's this application they made just generates the same password for every user at creation. And I know if you're a security or an encryption or hashing expert at this, you'll see that. And not only is it generating the same password every time, but they're also not using any salts or random generation of salts of that. Cookies are another interesting thing. We always tell our developers never store sensitive data in cookies, and use the secure attribute when you can, which the secure attribute is pretty cool because it only allows your cookie to be sent through HTTPS. So if you're browsing a site and say your site has a star wildcard certificate on it or something like that, and your cookie value is, I guess if you get your cookie for it and then you navigate to a different part that's HTTP, it's still going to be passing that cookie unless the cookie has the secure attribute. And you're only going to need it if you're using your cookie for your session token or ID, because the web is a stateless, so a lot of times your cookie is important for maintaining your session. And the HTTP only attribute's pretty important as well, because that protects you from JavaScript attacks, where you can send, the JavaScript can pick up and send it through different avenues. Another thing is databases. And the cool thing about application security too is if you focus a lot on your applications, you need to tie in your database security and database administrators closely, because so many applications have databases, nearly all of them do. And that's how I've learned about so many databases in the corporation, just from reviewing applications. So the main wins for databases are to parameterize all your queries. Don't allow them to concatenate user input. And also least privileged accounts and connection strings. You don't want your users connecting through SA. And I was just sitting in a training class earlier this week helping Scott Waite instruct. It was OWASP Top 10 and beyond. And we focused almost an entire half day on just SQL injection, because it's such a prevalent vulnerability, both just it's common for attackers, but it also is one of your biggest brand impact ones where they can or just take all of your intellectual property and dump a database. So if you have your connection string set in between your application and your database, you want to make sure that it only has access to that database. That way, if that gets breached, you know your scope for incident response. You already know what the account has access to, and your entire database server is not compromised. They can't take that over, start pivoting, connecting to other database servers, port scanning, and all the different things you can do through SQL injection. So just doing those two things are absolutely going to take have a great shift in your security posture. Input validation is also important. One thing is you know what? I skipped something kind of cool too in this last slide. This was an example of a cookie that I found where they had account lockout, I guess, implemented in their application, but the lockout counter was stored in your cookie value. So you throw that into like Burp Suite or something, and it's pretty sweet because it never switches. So you just add that, and intruder, you just pound away at the accounts and brute forced all of those. So that was a pretty cool finding that I thought, and that's some of the excitement too. Not everyone will appreciate that, but it makes it a little more enjoyable reading through a million lines of code. So, and this is also screenshot here is not necessarily about input validation, but when you see a pop-up in an application like this and it says that it can be used with Internet Explorer 4.0 or later, you probably have a little bit of concern. So my experience at least has shown that if you see red flags like that, you know that the code's probably not that great. So we always recommend whitelists for your developers. Anytime that your application's accepting an input, just use whitelist approach, regular expressions, and reject the bad input. Don't try to encode or do those things on input validation, but just expect it. If you're expecting a zip code, don't accept all your special characters and absolutely anything, and don't make it a length of 3,000. I mean, that just gives so much attack surface to work with. So as you minimize that attack surface on your inputs, you also greatly reduce the amount of space the attackers have to work with. Output encoding is also important, and this is part that protects your users a lot, because this will protect against cross-site scripting attacks. The attack we opened with, where they go to a website and open up, a lot of those could have been leveraged off of a cross-site scripting where maybe someone injects a malicious comment or something into a comment box or field, and the user has no clue that they've been compromised. So it's always important to encode your output and just ensure that everything displayed is being rendered properly. Transport layer security, don't have a login with HTTP. How many of you have sat in an airport and just sniffed the traffic at an airport on public wireless? I'm sure most of you have. Raise your hand. All right, that doesn't surprise me. So here's a cool finding I had once on an application where we required it to build a secure SSL connection from your web service to the back end. And rather than implementing, what it does is, and not a lot of code surrounding it, but it basically checks your host name and verifies, and it does a verified check on your SSL session, but it returns true no matter what it is. So everything's going to return true. Nothing's ever going to fail if you have an invalid certificate or anything like that. So it's important to do your due diligence. The web.config is a pretty powerful tool, and that's how I know in the booklet you probably saw I was listed, they call me the sniper a lot of times, and that's because when I do a pen test, I'll go and I'll find sometimes the stupid stuff that I'll go through and I'll find an open file share on a backup in a zip file in an old folder just manually, and find a web.config that might be 10 years old but still have a valid connection string in it with an SA database or something like that. And so I'll go through and just find stupid vulnerabilities that take up time but are just effective, and you see over and over again on just old files and things. So a few quick wins in your web.config is to encrypt any of the sensitive configurations. In .NET, they have the regIS tool, which will, or I don't think it's regIS, but one of those that will implement, and it'll use your machine key to encrypt the section. So if someone compromises it, they could rerun that tool, I guess, possibly on that specific server and decrypt the section. But if they pull the web.config, do wget, or pull whatever information off, they're not going to be able to decrypt those sections and steal your connection strings. Another important thing is custom errors, and I don't have it on the slide, it'll be coming up, but I have a pretty cool error message that I came across recently. And compilation debug, just set those so that it's turned off, and validate request, which also is another layer on top for protecting against output encoding that will basically look, and it does a check for script tags and different HTML things that would render to the browser. And encrypting the view state, one of the things we always tell developers is don't store sensitive information in your view state, but as we want to take the layered approach by encrypting it, if information does get in there, rather than it be base 64 encoded, which is typically the default of your view state, you're going to have it encrypted, so it's at least protected a little bit better. Do any of you guys like encryption here? All right. Well, if you ever come across good developers that understand encryption, do everything you can to keep them, because they're hard to come by, of ones that know exactly what they're doing, how to properly implement encryption technologies or hashing. And so many times I've seen, I don't know if you guys have ever gone to the Obvx site or searched encryption methods and things, but this is one of the top Google results that'll come up for encryption. And I've seen this multiple times where developers have taken this little section of code here, copy and pasted it into their application, and never changed anything other than the hello world up there to be whatever input it is. So, I mean, at that point, you're using public knowledge. Your keys are no longer secret, and it's a terrible approach, and it's just a quick way to know that your developer doesn't necessarily understand encryption. It is a challenging subject, and it does take some time to understand and learn, but it's absolutely vital in today's development and markets to be able to do things properly. So one of the things I like is whenever a big thing with PCI, I know it says like requirement is you need to use strong encryption. Well, what is strong encryption? That's a requirement, I'm pretty sure. It doesn't break down, and so we get into a lot of debates on, well, strong encryption, a static salt value, is it randomized for every single user, which is my recommendation always, because if you have a database dump and you have a static salt, all you have to do is generate one rainbow table with that salt, and you can compromise them all. Whereas if you have a separate salt value and you append that in the database for every single user, that's just added the entropy greatly for an attack. So it's things like that have conversations with developers. I highly recommend bringing up a question like that in an interview or something like. But I like to say you salt your potatoes, you salt your French fries, you salt your hash. Here's one of my favorite alerts that I've seen recently, where we always tell developers, your end users don't need to see the debug code or compilation errors, but when you come across in your testing application and you stick in some random, maybe a apostrophe or whatever for SQL injection, it comes back and tells you have a keyword or bad keyword by select, you know you're in a pretty good spot to compromise this app. So just always be mindful about what you're providing the users, because your users are also your attackers. Here's a couple of my favorites as well for C++ development, and it's just random stuff that you come across when you're reading C code and C++ that you're about to fall asleep, and you come across something that wakes you up a little bit more. So I really like the bottom one. He's just going with index 4, so he prays that it doesn't change very often. I believe in the power of prayer, but not always to that level. And then third-party applications. Have you guys ever looked at third-party applications that your users may be using? Is that something that you focus on, or do you focus mostly on your internally developed applications? Because what I've found is it's pretty scary whenever you start looking at third-party applications. And over the years, our internally developed ones have such a greater security posture than ones that we'll use from other places. And I like to use tools like JD GUI and .NET Reflector and things where you can, if they're not obfuscated, you can just open it up and pretty much see all the code in there. So you'll go through, and here's one where I found they wanted to put this on the internet, where if password equals whatever static value, then you're authenticated. And so not only is this a backdoor with this specific user account, but if you set your own user account password to this, you're going to bypass authentication every single time. And so it's things like this that you don't even know that you have a lot of times in third party. So it's important to do your due diligence on these. So what do you do about them? Well, you don't always have third-party code to review. But my approach has always been, why not ask for it? Why not try to get your third-party code? So a lot of times, I talk with the developers or whoever's selling it to us, and I'll say, well, we'll get in with an NDA with you guys, so we'll have a non-disclosure. But if you give us the code that we can look at, we'll definitely be more willing to make the sale. Whether or not we're going to make the sale, we don't have to tell them that either way. But surprisingly, we've had pretty good success by asking for third-party code, and they turn it over under an NDA. And that's been a pretty big win and pretty exciting because it gives them a value too, because source code reviews are not very cheap. I know if you use a lot of third-party ones, it's expensive. And also, the cool thing is it counts as a third-party review if done properly for a lot of audit checklists and things to say, well, we've had a third party evaluate this. So it's really, in some aspects, a win-win for both sides. So I recommend taking that approach and at least trying it and see if you have success with it. And you'll be surprised at some of the stuff you see in those applications. And I do a lot of my reviews on the application security verification standard, which it's very in-depth. It has a lot of steps, and there's different levels where you can do just a source code review and automated, both a combination of manual automated, and it has a lot of great things to look for. And I don't utilize every single check mark for every application, but I have found that to be a very valuable resource to use for reviewing. So you deliver a well-done product to your customers or vendors of their own application with ASVS rankings and ratings. It's a pretty big reward for them. So also, I'm very hesitant after seeing a lot of those third-party apps to put anything out on the public-facing internet without doing an actual source code review because of the things I've seen. So that's also another thing, is if it's going on the internet, it's almost a requirement now, because you can't afford to be at risk of backdooring the application or anything like that. And if you don't get the code, use mechanisms to go search strings, look for encryption keys that are hard-coded, salt values. I've found email addresses where it's emailing information about your usernames and things to outside the organization, trying to talk with email servers. I mean, it's unbelievable the stuff you find, but it's so beneficial once you start really digging in and looking at it. And the results in our application reviews have drastically improved since we started developing and implementing the application review program. And developers even kind of like it. They would never agree that when they get the results that they're always happy and going to benefit, but they're really doing their job. Career is a good thing too, because like I said, good secure developers with secure coding experience is pretty hard to find. Database security, we've kind of talked about, but I love leveraging your application security program to view into your databases. Quick wins require integrated authentication, which gets back to centralized management. And just understanding what you have, you can control password policies, you maintain from protect against blank SAs, which you find constantly if you start scanning 1433 across your network. Pretty fast way to do a full compromise on an internal pen test. And also separating your database servers from your web servers, and network segmentation is a huge key. And it's a huge win both for your IT departments and your security side. Vulnerability management we talked about a lot, maintaining the list. I saw this picture. Wouldn't you love to just see what would happen if that guy would take off really fast? I'd be interested, but you want to maintain and just have an understanding of where your vulnerabilities are, where are your pain points in the organization in terms of your security posture, and address those and start there with the program, because I understand you can't do everything at once, but it's just having these plans to implement just these small parts. There's so many pieces, but it's absolutely vital. And with little to no money, most of these things don't cost a lot of money to implement. It's just having the understanding that they need done and knowing how to properly plan and get people on the board, I guess, and understanding security. Cloud storage. How many of you guys use the cloud? So we added in our proxy, we block all cloud providers, which was a huge move because we had no clue how many people were storing Dropbox and you send it. And also what I learned is not only are users trying to back up their PCs to this site, which is pretty scary in itself, because then you lose control of all your data. I mean, it's just a data loss nightmare. And also, what was really just it blows my mind still is that it's not necessarily our company that has an issue with it, but a lot of I found construction sites and architectural drawings will look for companies to take bids on different projects and stuff. And I'll go through and a user will say, well, I can't get to this site. Can you go to it? I just go straight to it. I mean, you have to know the customer ID or whatever. It's a little bit, you can't always brute force these necessarily, but you go in and there's all these sometimes government facilities with the whole 50-page PDFs of architectural drawings of every single floor level. You have the sprinkler systems, networking, and it's unbelievable the amount of data that is on these cloud providers. And if a breach like that could be devastating to governments, to organizations, and I think it's a great thing for users that need storage for maybe home things and stuff like that that's not intellectual property, but be very careful with cloud storage in your organization because it could have a devastating impact if one of these big providers gets breached. Question? That's been a challenge because a lot of them aren't the big, I mean, I tell them, well, set up your own server. I mean, it's not that hard to set up a file server these days. You can buy a ton of storage set up. I don't tell them FTP because I don't want them FTP in it either. But I mean, if you can get SSH or just SFTP or FTPS, those are the best ways to really go and download. Then you can send a dedicated account to your customers so that only the people that you want to see your data, are getting it, and the third party has control. Or an approach we've taken is, since if they don't support that approach, then we use Safe Transfer, which stores data encrypted. And our users can create accounts for third parties where you send them an email, they log into it, they get a secure account, and then they upload the files, which uploads to our encrypted storage, so it's stored encrypted, and they can transfer large files that way. So it's kind of like an upload to our corporation, I guess. And that's kind of the approach. It is challenging because a lot of times, especially in bid scenarios, they only have maybe a day or two to get this, but it's a hassle. But hopefully by making it a little more complicated for the construction companies and the architectural companies, they'll start noticing and realizing, well, maybe there is something to this issue of us just posting it to the cloud storage sites. So hopefully we can take little footsteps to make some impact, but it's a pretty scary area in terms of what's on those sites. Again, centralization is key. If you know where your assets are, where your vulnerabilities are, where your important data is, it's going to be a huge win for your security. So where do you begin? We're going to go through these, and this is it's probably a bad idea. I saved probably the most boring part for last, but policies, baselines, and having a risk acceptance model is absolutely key and vital for your organization, because if you don't have a policy, you can't enforce anything, because you tell them, well, you need to be doing this or you need to be doing this. They'll come back to you and say, well, how am I supposed to know, or what do I do to get this information? And that's where, if you have a repository and you advertise it out so they know exactly, I'm a developer, I'm developing code, what do I need to do from a security standpoint? Provide that to them, provide policies, restrictions. And that way you have these things where you can provide your end users so they can really understand what's important and what they need to do. Baselines are so valuable as well for system administrators. Provide security baselines for operating systems, databases, and network, and just everything that's used, frameworks. Provide these and just deliver them out. It takes a lot of time to put these together, but there's some good resources with NIST and a lot of different places that you can search and find some good baselines for the starting points. But they're so important to really get out. And then a risk acceptance model, because as a security person, you don't want to always sign off on certain risks, but your business is willing to accept a lot of them sometimes that you don't even want. So you want to make sure that you're covered, you're protected if something does, and your job is really just to identify the risks, educate people of the impact to your brand and reputation, and make sure that it's understood. And then if they're willing to go against you, then have them sign a document and their job security, and you're 1-0 away from, but make sure that they understand that you're protected in that aspect. So it's time to build. You don't want your security foundation to look like that. So by just getting these principles, you can really start to leverage technologies then like IDS and SIM and start building a security operations center. But it takes these simple low-hanging fruit that you don't always think of to get implemented first before you can have an effective security posture. So closing thoughts, these aren't really security related, but I feel that as much as work integrates into your regular life a lot, I think your regular life has an impact on your work. So just be passionate about what you do. and be positive, impact people, and really just speak and try to bring out the best of people around you, because not everyone's going to have a good attitude all day, every day. And just try to help each other, because that's really what it takes, is a good environment to really build and move forward on projects and have people excited for stuff. And never stop learning. There's always stuff out there to learn. It's exciting, and I just encourage you guys to do that and find time to enjoy the beauty of life. Thanks, guys. Yes. Yeah. You can come up here if you want.